Do you feel better off after this week's budget? There's help with childcare, fuel, pensions for some, but wages are stagnating and we're on course to pay the highest level of tax since World War II. Tonight, we're in Warrington in Cheshire, sandwiched between the big cities of Liverpool and Manchester, with one Labour and one Conservative MP. And staying on the theme of money and funding, our audience is asking tonight, is HS2 worth all the billions that it's costing? And who will get their vote at the next election? Welcome to Question Time. Panel from the Conservatives, Bim Afalami, the son of a consultant NHS doctor. After a career in the city, he became an MP in 2017. He worked for Liz Truss when she was Foreign Secretary and then resigned as Deputy Chair of the party last summer, live on TV, over the scandals engulfing Boris Johnson. Labour's Lucy Powell shadows the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. She's previously held shadow briefs in business and housing. Just this week, she caused a bit of a stir in the Commons when comparing government behaviour over the Gary Lineker saga to Putin's Russia. Last December, Stephen Flynn got himself promoted. He now heads the Scottish National Party's 44 MPs in the Commons. Like many senior party figures, he's backing Scottish Health Minister Humza Yousaf to be his new boss in a torrid three-way battle to be SNP leader and First Minister. Anne McElvoy is another panellist with a recent new job. Having been the executive editor at The Economist magazine, she's now executive editor and head of podcasting at the news organisation Politico Europe. She also writes for the London Evening Standard and stretches her brain further on Radio 4's Moral Maze. And John Allan is a businessman of vast experience. He was previously president of the Confederation of British Industry, which represents nearly 200,000 businesses. He's currently the chairman of Tesco and the house builders Barratt Developments. Good evening. Hello from Warrington. Welcome to our panel. Welcome to my audience here. Great to see you. And, of course, as always, we're on social media too. And we'll get our first question going in a minute. And just to remind you that not only are we on BBC One after late news, as always, but we're also at 8 o'clock on the iPlayer, in case that's too late for your bedtime. Right, let's get our first question from Mike Georgeson.
Does the panel think yesterday's budget will help towards making Britain great again?
Bim.
I think it's a sensible budget from a sensible Chancellor. A few big things in it that I think will make a big difference to families. The first is a huge new offer for people on childcare. Anybody, working parents, anybody worried about affordability and accessibility for affordable childcare, 1- and 2-year-olds now being covered with a 30 hours free childcare. I think that'll make a big difference. Anybody who runs a business, you'll get 100% tax deducted if you invest in machinery, your plant, your buildings. That will make a big difference to those businesses. And many other measures as well. We're supporting people all across the country. More powers, more money for local regions like the West Midlands, like Greater Manchester, lots of other things as well. It's not the complete thing, and it's important that no one budget fixes all the government's problems.
So what do you think it hasn't fixed?
Well, I think that the biggest thing, in addition to the sort of policy measures I mentioned, was inflation coming down very fast, much faster than was previously predicted. That will enable us in the next budget, in the autumn statement, and then the budget next year to do even more, because inflation, once it's under control, as we've seen with the deal with the unions in the health sector, NHS today, that will mean that we can go further and faster.
OK, so what do you think Jeremy Hunt missed out then?
Well, I think that you can only deal with so many things. What I think we should do more of is I think we should try and get the tax burden down over time. It's very difficult at the moment to do that because of the difficult financial situation the country and indeed most Western countries are in. That's one thing that over the coming years and months we should definitely try and bring down for ordinary people.
Lucy.
Well, I think Britain can be great again, and I think Britain has got lots of good things about it that mean that we are well placed to be great again. But I don't think this budget and many of the strategies that the government has been pursuing recently will help us get there. I think the budget yesterday was divorced from most people's reality. It was divorced from, I think, most of the audience's reality in terms of the cost of living and prices going up, wages going down. We're now set to have the biggest fall in living standards ever recorded in these recent years. Divorce from what's happening in our public services. Virtually no mention of the NHS and what's happening in our NHS and public services at the moment, with huge waiting times and so on that we're seeing. Divorced, I think, from most businesses' realities, who are facing higher costs, huge energy costs. They want to see action on business rates and things like that. Nothing in it for them at all either. And for some of the big businesses that John and others represent, you know, we're missing out on this global race for the new jobs of the future. Nothing new in that budget for all those opportunities that Britain has before it. I think, finally, it was divorced from reality in who it benefited most in some of the decisions that they took and who it didn't. I mean, why you need £1 billion pension tax cut for the top 1% of this country when everybody in this audience is paying higher tax as a result of this government, I just beggars belief.
Okay. John, Lucy's saying it's divorce from reality when it comes to business.
Yeah, look, I think there were some good messages in the budget. I listened to it, and I think it started to talk about some of the things that do need to be addressed, but frankly, it was headlines rather than detail. And what this country needs, I think, is a really clear plan for recovery. As Lucy said, I'm an optimist. I think Britain can be great again, but it's not going to happen by accident. It's going to happen because government and business and local communities and our universities, which are a real national strength, work together to forge a plan and then carry it out. And I think there was nods in the direction of some of the things that we need to do, but, you know, it's all too little and too slow, and I'd love to see the government speed up and also flesh out what it's actually going to do. You know, my daughter has 2 small children. She contacted me this morning to say she's not at all clear that this childcare thing is actually going to work. It sort of sounds good, but actually, you know, is there going to be substance? And her kids will be out of the zone for childcare by the time it actually fully comes into effect. So I think we need a national plan, and it's good that the government is starting to talk about growth, but I think they need to demonstrate how they're going to do it.
And can I ask you, Mike's question is, will the budget help towards making Britain great again? Do you think the Conservatives are the government to make Britain great again?
I think that's for the electors to decide,
But what
next
do you
year. All I can say is, based on my observation, I think Labour at the moment have developed some very good and very plausible plans, which, if they're elected, hopefully they will put into effect. I'd love to see the government doing the same thing, engaging with business, developing detailed plans to generate growth for this country and all over this country too. I think we do need to make a reality of levelling up. I used to come to Warrington as a young man, as a young Unilever trainee, to watch Purcell being manufactured at Crossfields. Sadly, that's gone now, but we need to have a programme, I think, to reindustrialise, to get back into manufacturing, and it's possible. It's not by doing what we did 100 years ago. It's by developing future industries and really committing to them. So
Lots of hands up. The lady there with the blue hair.
Thank you. I think the childcare announcement is really welcome. I was paying over £1,000 a month for my childcare. I've got friends who have got 2 children in nursery care and are paying nearly £2,000 a month. However, it's too slow. Why are we bringing the pensions relief in for the wealthiest in society next month, but those who are really, really struggling with the cost of living now have to wait until next April to get that help with childcare?
OK. Bim, I will come back to you on that. I'm going to get round the rest of the panel first. Let's hear a bit from our audience first. Yes, the man there with the white and blue top. Can't quite see. Yes.
I'd just like to wonder how the government can justify giving tax relief to the top 1% when there's people going to food banks. These people who are getting this tax relief can already afford to pay up to £3,500 a month into the private pension scheme, and yet they're giving them more, and the people who need it most are getting less.
OK. And the woman in front of you.
I think the announcement about childcare is great, but I think that the government are prioritising economy over family. There's no support for families where one parent wants to remain at home to care for their own children. It's just encouraging us to outsource childcare so that we are out in the workplace, and I think there should be more support for families to be families.
So do you think there's... It kind of gives... applies a kind of pressure to make you feel that actually you should be out at work rather than looking after your
generations
child if you
ago,
want
a family could live on one salary comfortably. It's very hard to live on one salary now. Obviously, there's single-parent families as well. There's no support for parents who want to raise their own children and don't want to hand them out to other people, especially when they're 1 and 2, and they should really be with their parents.
OK. Stephen?
Well, the folk who I speak to will share the same view that I do right now, that this budget is a complete and utter letdown. And I'm quite angry about it because people can't afford to pay their energy bills, they can't afford to pay their mortgages, they can't afford to pay their rent, they can't afford to pay their food bills, they can't afford, some of them, to put clothes on their kids' back or shoes on their kids' feet. And the Chancellor's answer to that was to keep energy bills at an astronomically high level while stealthily taking £400 away through the energy rebate scheme. He wants old people and disabled people to pull up their socks and have an MOT and go back to work. He wants to give the richest people in society a tax break on their pensions. What planet do these people live on? And I can't wait. I cannot wait to see them get stuffed at the next general election. But I tell you what,
That'll only happen if people vote Labour in Scotland.
Beware one thing, though, and I'll address that directly, because the last thing we need at this moment in time is for Keir Starmer to come to power with the views that he has now, because he is little more than David Cameron with a red tie. That is not good enough. He will not return us to prosperity. We need much better. And for people in Scotland, the answer to that is independence.
Do you know, I was wondering how long it would be before you brought that up, Stephen. Can I just check, in terms of this pension pot, would you see any... I mean, also part of the reason the government's brought this in is because of doctors and consultants who are not working longer hours because they're caught up in the NHS pension scheme and have to contribute and therefore have to pay more tax. And it's not cost efficient for them to work. Can you see any way around that?
So make it about doctors and consultants then. Don't make it about financiers. Don't make it about all the other people in society who are already incredibly wealthy in their own right. There are people seriously struggling at this moment in time, and the Tories have got their head in the sand as always.
Anne?
If I just return to the budget as a whole, I think the question was, will it make Britain great again? Let's remember where we were starting from. This was our low bar. Maybe quite good to get Britain sane again after what happened at the last budget and the events of last autumn. And we mustn't forget, you know, it was a very difficult time for the economy. It was a very bad time, I think, generally for Britain in the world. And we've gone on a bit of I'm not only blaming Liz Truss, I think we've been on a bit of a wing and a prayer about what it takes to turn around the economy in the UK. And so for me, making Britain grow again, making Britain attractive again, would be what I was looking for. I felt overall, as a budget, I very much approved of the childcare push. I think, like a lot of people, I was very lucky to be able to have the earnings to go out to work and to be able to have help look after my children. I know so many women who've been, it is, I'm afraid, mainly women, it's not only women, but families, let's say, more generously, who find themselves very conflicted. And what happens is they fall out of the workforce or they fall behind in their careers, and with more support, and there are much better models for this in continental Europe, they can stay in the workforce. So I think it is very good. It will be difficult to get it together. The reason I think the lady asked, why does it take so long? I'm afraid it does. You can't just magic it up. But it does need to be delivered, and it needs to be delivered. I'm looking meaningfully at the Conservative on the panel. It needs to be delivered with quality childcare as well. That nobody wants is a situation in which small children are put into childcare that isn't good. Where I would probably have a bit... I'm less sure about this, but when we think about what makes Britain attractive, why would you come here? Why would you invest? What are you going to invest in? You know, Lucy Powell saying quite rightly, well, it's not very exciting. But you know, that is really a matter of the parties deciding that they want Britain to be attractive, and sometimes that means being competitive. And sometimes it means not only focusing on some redistribution or something that got your goat about whether a doctor can top up their pension pot. I don't think that's really focusing on what we need, which is to figure out where we fit now in the global economy, in Europe, in very, very difficult times, to sustain our investment and just keep going, not by endlessly changing one thing, changing another, and getting too worked up about things which however much they may irk people in the audience, I do think are at the margins of what matters in this budget.
OK, I'm going to come back to you, Bim. Obviously, there's a lot of questions directed to you. I just want to hear a bit more from our audience first. The woman there in the black top.
Hi. My question has to be, can the sector actually afford the new childcare bill? Basically, because I think, you know, are they looking at the bigger picture? Because obviously we're offering this childcare to all. It's not just low-income families. So these private organisations, private childcare nurseries, are going to have to, I presume, go under renovation, extensions to provide, you know, more facilities, obviously employ more people. So, you know, not only is there the cost to the day-to-day childcare, but there's going to be an initial amount that needs to be put into it. So my question has to be, you know, can the sector afford that?
Okay.
Have they thought about?
And the woman in front, do you still want to make your point?
Along similar lines, the CBI are predicting that it's going to cost more than double what's been set aside by the Chancellor, 9 billion almost, compared with 4 billion. How can we trust that that's a credible and realistic policy?
Right, well, Bim, listen, let's come to you, because there's a lot of talk about the childcare policy. So the question from back there was, why are you introducing pension relief right now, whereas childcare's not going to come until 2024, 2025? And actually, will the nurseries be able to afford these expansions?
Look, really, really good question. Just to take the point about whether nurseries can afford it, built into the budget is we're increasing the fee, the amount paid for every single child by 30% to nurseries.
Not for 3 to 4-year-olds. That's about was it 4% or something? Yeah, for 1 or 2, it's increasing by... For 1 to 2-year-olds, increasing by 30%. Yes. For 4-year-olds, increasing from £5.29 to £5.50. That's nowhere near 30%.
But at the moment, we're already providing the free childcare for 3 and 4-year-olds. So for the expansion, we're increasing it by 30%. So therefore, that is going to be significantly important so that the nurseries can employ more people and grow their premises where necessary. And look, when people say, and I heard the lady make the point, you know, why is this not happening now? I wish it was happening now. You know, everybody wants this to happen as quickly as possible. This childcare policy was really discussed and lobbied within the Conservative Party in government for many weeks and months. We just have to be honest with people about how long it takes to do the practical things that the lady here was talking about in terms of hiring more people, expanding premises. Being honest with people and being practical, that it may take us 12 to 18 months to get that fully sorted, I think is a reasonable thing to do. And in relation to the pensions issue, which came up, and I didn't mention it at the beginning and I should have done, there are 2 things. The first is, it is really important when we've got a lot of people who are over 50 dropping out of the workforce. We've had one of the highest in the Western world of numbers of those people dropping out of the workforce, hundreds of thousands. We need to try and nudge them back in. NHS workers are one group, but they're not the only group. There are experienced people...
How many of the ones who try and nudge back in are going to be in this kind of... I mean, they have to earn an awful lot of money to be able to benefit from this.
But no, that's not true, because what we're doing is we're removing the cap on lifetime amounts that you can put... the amount of money you can put into your pension. What that means is that everybody... This is for everybody. So this is not just a thing that is only going to apply to the highest, the best paid.
It's over £1 million.
But it's a lifetime point. It's over a lifetime.
I know, but
as a society,
people can't afford their shops, let alone putting tens of thousands of pounds, millions into a pension.
As a society, why I think this is really important is that we've got to try and encourage all of us to invest more in our pensions over time, over our whole lifetimes. Removing that lifetime cap will increase, in particular the NHS, experienced doctors who are leaving and experienced people in other areas of the economy. But also, it will benefit all of us for a longer-term change.
Okay,
and I think that... And you know who I agree with? Lucy's colleague, Wes Streeting, who's the Shadow Health Secretary, who said, if we remove this cap, it will save lives. That makes sense to me. Why does it not make sense to you?
Was he referring generally or just to the NHS?
No, he wasn't referring generally. And look, my husband's an A&E consultant, actually here in Warrington, so I'm very, very well familiar of the issues for some doctors about this lifetime thing. And there is a solution that could be for just doctors that would be a hell of a lot cheaper than what you're talking about, this blanket ban, where, you know, that's why the wealth management sector called it a bonanza today. Because for these people, the average lifetime pot of a pension for most people in this country is £37,000, not £1 million or £2 million. And there's also an inheritance tax loophole in this. So most of the money that's being spent on this by the government, £1 billion a year, that's a lot of money, is not about the workforce issues for doctors, which could be solved a different way for a lot less money than this. This is about giving a big boon to the top, and not even 1%, 0.5%, who have got the luxury of being able to put a lot of money into it.
Let's get around our audience a bit more, because there's lots of hands up. The woman there in the spotty top, yeah.
Hi. I'd like to ask Stephen his point about the energy. Jeremy Hunt has U-turned now and has put a cap on the energy prices till June. Is this going to be sustainable for families? Families like me who have a disabled son, we need the energy to still be on for over the summer periods because they need warmth, especially children with cerebral palsy, etc. And there is no funding that's been put aside for disabled people or children with disabilities. Do we need a social energy tariff?
OK, so I'll come back to that if I may. Just hear a few more people here. Yes, the man in the check shirt at the front. Yeah.
I think one of the things we have to be thankful for from the budget is it didn't have the reaction of the last financial statement. And I would also say, as one of the over 50s...
You're talking about the Truss government, obviously.
Yes, yes. As one of the over 50s who's voluntarily left the workplace, I think the change in the pension cap would not entice me to go back. Wouldn't make any difference. So it may only apply to a certain level of doctors and some other professions, but I don't think it's going to attract majority back.
So is there anything, just out of interest, the government could do to attract you back?
No.
You're just enjoying it too much.
But it's actually just on that point, because it really depends where you are. For other people, we're actually offering a lot more support for people in midlife or mid-career, helping them get into new things, reskill, retrain. That's really important for a lot of people as well.
You're going to sanction them if they don't. That's not offering support. That's literally just hitting people with a big stick.
That's just completely not true.
No, of course it's true.
It's not true.
The woman here.
What I don't understand is how it's taken so long for this childcare issue to be brought to head. This has been going on for years and years and years. The Conservative Party have been in power for years. And also, what will happen? It won't take effect for another couple of years. What is going to happen with the mass influx of parents wanting to bring children into childcare establishments when childcare establishments are closing at a rapid rate at the moment?
OK. The woman there with the dark hair. Yeah, no, sorry, let's get them right. You've got your hand up there with long dark hair. That's it.
How is the government going to help the early years sector deliver the new funding proposals? The current qualified practitioners in the workforce is at an all-time low, and there isn't enough time to recruit enough people during qualifications to actually deliver it in time with the proposals, so there needs to be a real reform.
It's interesting. So this, obviously, the childcare proposals were one of the big things that Jeremy Hunt wanted to unveil in the budget, and what I'm hearing back is a lot of concern and dissatisfaction with it. In the interest of balance, is there anyone here who thinks it's a good idea and thinks it's going to help? You do? Right, OK.
It's just, it needs real thought of how that's going to be delivered properly, because currently, if we don't change the way things currently are, it won't be possible.
You're completely right. It does need to make sure that it's delivered sensibly with the partnership of the early years sector. You're completely right.
But what do you think about the fact that at the moment the government's proposing, something like £4 billion, and you've got the CBI, I think it is, saying it's going to cost twice as much as that?
Well, when they do the costings, it's done not by just the government. The Office of Budget Responsibility also looks at that, and that's the number that they have come to. So I'm not saying they're right and the others are wrong. Ultimately, it will depend on how well we implement this policy. But what I'm hearing tonight is people are keen for it to work, but we've got to make sure that we deliver it, and we will.
But it's not free, it's funded as well. The current funding rates don't work.
That's why we're increasing them, as I say, for 1- and 2-year-olds by 30%.
Fiona,
John, yes.
If I could intervene, isn't this a very good example of how not to develop policy? I think almost everybody thinks this is a good idea. Why was there not more consultation with the providers of...
There was a huge amount of consultation.
Yeah, well,
there was a huge amount.
Well, that's not what they're saying today, Bim. They're saying it's impractical, it's underfunded. and so on. And I just think that, you know, if it had been better thought through, it would have got a much better response, which it probably deserves to get a better response, because it's definitely a step in the right direction, but it just looks half-baked.
Well, I tell you why it didn't get more consultation, because the government is all about politics, I'm afraid. They could see that the Labour Party, we've been really banging on about childcare issues for many years, actually, and particularly ramping that up in recent months. We needed... they knew we were going to have a sort of big offer at the next election. We've been doing lots of work about how we can make that offer work, how it could work with the sector, what it needed to look like. It's also a very complicated system we've got in this country. You get some tax-free, some free hours that aren't really free. It's a subsidy. You get some money through your universal credit. It's a complete mess, and it does need looking at. And so the government, the Conservative government, wanted to shoot our fox on that and try and not make it an issue at the next election, which is why they brought something forward before it was ready. It was a back of a fag packet job, really, wasn't it? Let's be honest.
Now, Stephen, I'm going to bring you both back in before I move on. Stephen, specifically, there was a question from the one at the back there about a social energy tariff.
Yes.
Is that something the SNP would bring in?
I think everyone would be broadly supportive of something like that. I would obviously need to look at the details. But in terms of energy, and this is an important point, so the Chancellor has obviously said that it's going to be £2,500 capped. And that only is for average households. Obviously, it depends upon your usage. But there's about £30 billion worth of fiscal headroom available to him. He shouldn't have been freezing bills. He should have been cutting people's energy bills. That would have put real money into people's pockets. It would have helped to improve living standards across the board. And very, very quickly on workforce issues, which applies not just in the public sector, but in the private sector. There's a simple answer to that, an answer which the Conservatives don't want to hear, and indeed the Labour Party don't want to hear, and that's to reintroduce freedom of movement with our friends and neighbours on the continent of Europe.
Anne, briefly, if you would.
Just coming back on the childcare point, I don't think Lucy can be entirely surprised that the government practices politics, just as the Labour Party occasionally does. And I would give credit to the Labour Party.
But I'd rather they thought about it before they just did it, just as a political gesture.
Well, hang on, they're doing something that you kind of like them to do. And I do think people get quite tired. And I think it's very difficult for the Labour Party, because actually, when it gets down to brass tacks, apart from something like pension tax relief, lots of this budget, I think Labour would fundamentally agree with. Nobody wants to have an argument about tax. Labour doesn't really want to have much of an argument about tax. So some of those old dividing
we had a massive argument about tax at the last budget and the budget before.
We haven't had one at the moment. In fact,
they haven't said anything on tax.
Spending plan.
They haven't said anything about tax. People are now paying more tax than ever, and they didn't say anything in the budget about that.
Right. So well, then you can tell us. Are you going?
We will be. Don't worry.
Okay. Well, good.
When is that going to happen? Actually, hang on a second. When's that going to happen?
As part of our manifesto process, you have to see what the economy is at the time, obviously, and make those sums out.
Just out of interest,
and make those sums up.
How far out from election would we expect to see it?
We'll do all those things in due course.
I knew it was going to be due course.
Okay. And briefly finish your point.
I just knew it was
we oppose the NICS rise. We oppose the 45p cut. You know, there were clear things that we've been saying.
I know that's the greatest hits, but here we go. On the childcare point, I just feel that is a good example. Yes, it is imperfect. I thought the questions are very targeted. There is a lot of practicality. There's policy, and I also will be focused on testing how it works out in practice. But it is the right direction of travel. And I think the best thing is sometimes for the parties to get together and accept that something which is overdue is a good idea, and by all means knock yourselves out arguing about the detail. But the main thing is that we stick behind it and start to deliver policy over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whoever is in power. Because if we don't, we go in the zigzag. We have Labour Sure Start, then we have the problems with Sure Start, then it's pulled back, then something else. The kids have grown up. So that's the
I completely agree with that, though, in that sense. So we've been campaigning on childcare improvements for a long time.
All right, Lucy, we hear you. I'm just going to move on, because we won't get any of your other questions in, and it'll just be about this. So before I do, I just want to tell you that Question Time is in Newcastle under Lyme, Staffordshire next week. The week after that, we are in Bristol, so all parts of England for that week. Obviously, we'll be coming to Scotland as well, Stephen. So if you'd like to come to either show, go to the Question Time website, address is here, follow the instructions and come along and be part of our audience. OK, so we are taking a question now from Pauline Weston.
Yeah. To what extent do the panel agree or disagree that HS2 is a total waste of money and an environmental disaster?
Right. So, Judging from the way you phrased that question, Paul, I'd imagine you do think it's a total waste of environmental disaster. And as we know, a section of it is now being delayed for 2 years. We're told that will save money. John?
Yeah, I think it's a question of priority. My own view is, and talking to people in this part of the world and also on the other side of the Pennines, that the real priority is improving regional transport within regions. So that and I think we've missed out. I think the Northwest, Yorkshire and so on have missed out on that big time. As far as HS2 is concerned, I think there is an argument for it, which is to do with capacity. But I'm not sure that actually being able to get from London to Manchester, and even less so from Manchester to London, 20 minutes quicker or whatever it is necessarily a great thing for mankind. So my personal view is probably that maybe we shouldn't have done this. Now that it's half built, I think there are some very difficult arguments about whether and how to complete it, which I think are probably going to end up on the laps of the next government rather than this government. I think this has been kicked down the road for a couple of years.
Yes, and this 2-year delay, and we've been told that's because construction costs are rising and there's a 2-year delay, hopefully that will save costs. Will it save costs, do you think?
I would love to understand why, if construction costs are rising, they're actually going to start falling again after 2 years. I suspect this is about postponing expenditure now, and I was debating earlier with one of the other members of the panel whether this, this being delayed means, in effect, it may never be restarted or not. And we'll find out in due course, I guess. But I think we really should be getting focused on getting transport right for the people who live in this part of the world and other parts of the world, and that this intra-regional, as well as inter-regional connectivity is really important. And I wish more money was going into that, and I'd like to encourage the government or the next government, whichever it is, to give that a major priority.
OK. So, Finn, I should say, incidentally, you very kindly stood in at the last minute because we had a government minister coming on this evening and for entirely legitimate personal reasons couldn't come. So, Ben, we're grateful to you. So, in terms of what John's saying there, this 2-year delay, how on earth does it save money? Or is it just kicking it into long grass?
Well, there are two things. The first is I think we shouldn't have to make a choice between HS2 and better rail connections within the northern parts of the country. Right?
But every time I come to this part of the country, people in the audience say that's exactly what is happening. Is that fair?
Right. So that's why I said we shouldn't have to make a choice between. We need to do both. In relation to the HS2 scheme itself...
When you say we need to do both, that isn't what's actually happening, though.
So as we come to the HS2 scheme itself, it's clear that this is not a well-conceived scheme. Any scheme that lasts as long as it has, with the costs going up as they have, is not a scheme that is fit for purpose. A 2-year delay can help potentially improve that, but it will really depend on the detail of exactly what we're doing in those 2 years to make sure that we get the cost down and make it the scheme that really works.
So how will it get cost down?
Well, it would really depend on the very minute details of exactly how you're designing the scheme, the contractors you're using, the timeframes, how much it costs for you to buy the land, all sorts of details around it. But fundamentally, I think that it is wrong for us to say, let's just abandon HS2 that is already being built, but we've got to make sure we find a better way in this country of building massive infrastructure. Other parts of the world, per mile, when they build railway, it's so much cheaper than this country. We really need to look at what is wrong with how we are doing it. It's not a problem of intention. The Labour Party, when they're in office, wanted HS2. We pushed it forward, but we're not delivering these things properly. And I think
you've had quite a long time, just to point out the obvious.
I came into Parliament only 5 years ago.
I'm talking about the government.
Right, yeah.
Quite a long time to work out if you're doing it properly or not.
Well, it is clear. It is clear
Put down the spade. Put down the spade.
In all areas...
Keep going, Bim. Keep going. Come on.
We are not doing this very, very well because it is a really complicated, one of the biggest infrastructure schemes in the world. But we can do it because Crossrail did get done. So I know we have the capacity to do it. We need to be able to do that in HS2 and across the north of other regions of the country to make sure we connect up our different regions, because unless we can get the cost of these things down, Nobody will ever put forward doing major infrastructure again in this country, and that would be a shame. But let's not just say we shouldn't ever do big schemes.
Right. Not surprised, quite a few hands up on this one. I could have predicted that. First of all, the woman here in the pink top.
Hello. Yeah, I live in an area where multiple houses were under compulsory purchase because of the HS2 scheme. So there was enormous upset, which has actually caused ill health for a number of families, and families who live very close to me who have fallen victim to that. In addition to that, the infrastructure in order to get to the HS2 point to board the train is likely to actually take the amount of time, which is the difference in the shortened journey from where I live to London. So in terms of leaving the house and getting to London, the time of the journey isn't probably going to be very much different at all, and I'm literally talking 10 or 15 minutes.
I mean, one argument for HS2 is that it would increase capacity even if it doesn't shorten the time. Does that convince you at all?
I feel that we have a decent... Where we do have quality, I agree with the point that we actually can get from this part of the country to London relatively easily, regularly. The quality of the trains is sufficient.
There's a murmur of agreement with you there, I have to say.
The local networks, much less so, in terms of the quality of the trains, the regularity, the size, they're cramped. That's where the problem is.
OK. The woman in the black top there, yes.
With reference to what John expressed with regards to local transport links, the size of Warrington now and the new houses that are being built, it's practically turning into a city. So how would John recommend the local transport links are improved? And I live in South Warrington, which doesn't really have the transport links out to Manchester or Liverpool, yet we do have 2 motorways on our doorstep. But there's part of Manchester's tram system, Altrincham, that ends not so far away, and if that was extended over to areas like Lymm, Thelwall, Stockton Heath, it would be so much of improvement to not just the environment, but the people's lives within those areas. But South Warrington gets nothing.
OK. And the man in front in the glasses. Yes.
Isn't the reason we don't get anything built and everything's over cost is because nobody wants it built in their backyard? I know it's bad to echo Tom Hardwood, but shouldn't we just build it?
Shouldn't you just build it? OK, yes, so you were saying the other week. Yes, and the woman there can you see the woman there with the red top and the long brown hair? Yes.
Thank you. I think, Bim, I agree with your statement, but you chose to do Crossrail, you chose to do HS2, you could have chosen to choose a connection between Liverpool and Leeds, you could have chosen to improve the network between Liverpool and Birmingham or Manchester and Birmingham, but you chose not to.
OK. Anne. So shall I just remind you, to what extent do you agree or disagree that HS2 is a total waste of money and an environmental disaster?
Yeah, I do. I'll just flesh that out a tiny bit. The question, why can't you just build it? I have some sympathy with the gentleman who asked that, because I have to say, we should also say that sometimes not everything we think is going to happen turns out the right way. Initially, I was quite a believer in HS2. I thought it would come from the northeast. I liked the idea that the north, whether it was the northwest or the northeast, putting aside any ancestral differences, would be more connected. I thought this would really sort of help power forward economies that were getting left behind. But, the project, to put it mildly, has let me down. And I think where we are now, we are throwing good money after bad. And you can see the problem with saying, don't just stop doing infrastructure things, Bim. Yes, I agree, as I also believed, but it is just out of control. And then it becomes a sort of put it off in order to not face up to the fact that something is quite profoundly wrong with what you started in the first place. And it really isn't working. The other thing I would say, our lives have changed a lot in that time. We now work a lot more happily remotely. We've also been through, we had to because of the pandemic, but that is going to hang around. So I suppose in my mind, I had everyone working on their laptops on these trains whizzing up and down the country. A lot of people don't want to work like that. They want to work more locally. They want to work and be able to travel. And I completely agree with the lady here in the pink jacket, which said, our problem is getting around locally and in the regions. It's often less what we thought it was, which is let's join these dots between the big cities. And final point, the Trans-Pennine experience. I mean, now, if I were to get from County Durham on the railways, it was Homer's Odyssey, isn't it? I mean, this is really where the North and the levelling up agenda needs to focus now. More regional devolution about these decisions, and I'm afraid HS2 is an expensive elephant and, well, I don't want to say anything bad about elephants, but it's done. Stephen.
I think, firstly, when it comes to trains, we could probably do with the government getting around the table with the RMT and actually striking a deal in the first instance so that the trains that are pre-existing actually run on time. I think that would be of benefit to most folk. But when it comes to high-speed rail, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Japan was building high-speed rail before I was even born, and yet we can't even complete one single project on time. And from a Scottish perspective, this comes nowhere near Scotland. Where's the benefit for the rest of the UK from this project? There is none, particularly for my part of the world, when we are completely detached from HS2. So I think the government really needs to consider what their priorities are in relation to this, and whether they want to continue throwing billions after billions towards this project.
So, Lucy, obviously you're hoping to get in power.
Yep.
Possibly pretty soon.
Yep.
Would you continue with HS2?
Yes, and let me explain why. So first of all, I mean, at the beginning of this, I think you asked the audience, would you rather choose between HS2 and more regional infrastructure? And I think the rest of the audience said, well, let's choose more regional infrastructure. This government is not presenting that choice. At the moment, we've got a choice between the infrastructure that's underway or nothing. And what they've chosen is nothing. So yet again, the North is getting no extra rail investment. That's what's actually happening here. We have got absolutely shocking rail infrastructure in the North. We all know that. They're all the trains being cancelled, whether it's strike days or not. The rolling stock is dreadful. The connections are awful. The distance between my constituency, Manchester, and here is 35 miles. That's shorter than the Central Line in London. There would be no question of Crossrail in London being cancelled or shortchanged. It would just be as much money as it's needed, because the philosophy in London is build it and they will come. It will introduce economic development. It will bring jobs. It will bring new businesses. Those same maths do not apply to projects that involve the North. That is the top and bottom of it in terms of this government. And HS2, yes, we do absolutely need Crossrail across the North, probably more than HS2, but let's not forget the bit that they've just paused at the moment, the leg from Crewe to Manchester, that is the Crossrail of the North Line as well. So if you don't have HS2, you don't have Crossrail of the North there either. And the government's own paper around delaying this for 2 years said it was actually going to cost more money to delay it and cost jobs to delay it. And I know, as a Manchester MP, that these constant delays are costing investment opportunities as well, because I speak to businesses who say that their biggest barrier to investing in Manchester and other places is because they cannot be sure about these big infrastructures, whether they're actually going to happen or not, when their businesses would rely on it. So we are constantly being shortchanged, and it is actually ridiculous that this government is now a government that professes to believe in levelling up, is yet again cancelling yet another rail investment project in the North, because it's only the North bit that's being cancelled. John.
I wondered if I could respond briefly to the lady in the back who raised this issue. I don't see something positive about the budget. This may actually be a shock to the system. But one thing that was in the budget was, I believe, a commitment to greater devolution for transport management and transport planning. I live in London, and frankly, in London, we are luxuriously treated in terms of local transport. I mean, I only moved into London 8 years ago. I wasn't aware how good it was, how easy it is to move around. I think if this responsibility is given back to combined authorities or whoever, and they're given the funding to be able to do something about it, because giving them power without any finance will get us nowhere, I think there's a real chance that proper plans for local transport, which are not just about rail and trams and buses and other ways of connecting people, you have a chance of making that happen. So I think that was one of the little hidden gems within the budget earlier in the week. Now, I think the challenge for all of us is to make sure the government lives up to that.
OK. Let's take another question. From Lee Jump.
Is it possible for the Conservatives to turn around current polling and win the next general election?
Right, so the obvious people are to come to Lucy and Bim, but Stephen, I'm going to come to you first.
Well, In Scotland, it probably won't surprise many people to learn that the Tories haven't won an election in Scotland since 1955. And I think it's safe ground for me to say that they will not win the next election in Scotland, or the one after that, or the one, indeed, after that. So what
about the next general election?
So the next general election, I think everyone's relatively assured of the fact that Keir Starmer is more likely to become Prime Minister than Rishi Sunak is. However, in Scotland, the argument is very, very different. The SNP is obviously ahead in the polls, and comfortably so, and we hope to continue to be. So that means that we have an important job to do to keep the Labour Party honest. And I referred to this earlier because the way I see Keir Starmer, he's a pale imitation of Rishi Sunak at the moment. When you look at the customs union, when you look at the single market, when you look at Brexit, when you look at the decision in relation to Scotland's constitutional future, he is literally David Cameron with a red tie. It is not sustainable for the Labour Party to continue with the policies that they have. And I have absolutely no doubt that when we go to the polls in Scotland at that general election, the Labour Party will lose.
OK. I hate to be boring about this, but the question was about the general election. So I mean, at the moment, Labour are ahead in the polls. And you can never know what's going to happen at a general election. There's a lot of don't knows whenever there's polling done. If it gets a position where actually it gets to a point of a hung parliament, would you support a Labour government in a general election?
Well, certainly I would never put myself in a position where I would seek to allow the Conservatives to come into power, but we would have a number of fairly basic asks of the Labour Party.
So you might with Labour then?
But we would have a number of very basic asks for the Labour Party. They would need to change their stance in relation to the European Union. They would need to change their stance in relation to growing the economy. They would need to change their stance in relation to green renewable future.
Would they have to become SNP?
They would need to change their stance. I'll tell you what they could do is allow the people of Scotland the right to choose their own future, because at the moment, whether it's Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer, they continue to deny the people of Scotland the right to choose their future, a very basic principle in democracy. And whether you are a unionist or a nationalist, you should be concerned about that democratic issue.
Anne, you're raising your eyebrows at quite a lot of that.
I'm afraid I was, yeah. I did a bit of an eyebrow moment. Just to come back to the question, I think it's going to be very hard for Conservatives to get a majority at the next election. I think that, you can see the polling at about 20 points and north of that. That is, still sending a fairly settled message. I think under Rishi Sunak has clearly got a strategy, and the reason I suspect that Labour are probably feeling a bit less confident than they were a couple of months ago is there is at least a strategy on the Conservative side, and you can see him executing on it. We're not going to touch on it all tonight, but whether it's the Windsor framework, whether it's the reconnection and getting to know the continental neighbours again, and he's around a lot more. He's much more sort of, I think, secure on what he's trying to do, but a lot of damage has been done, and frankly, the pendulum swings. And sometimes it's just good to be looking at change. In a way, what interests me is why, when I talk to Labour people, at least will speak for herself tonight, I don't yet feel that there's this absolute confidence in the Labour Party that they can win a majority. They're sort of almost psychologically in hung Parliament territory. And I think that does affect the policy debate. I think it affects whether we, what we feel that we could bank on if we're thinking of moving our vote, or never voted Labour before, want to vote it again, whatever our situation is. So I'm always interested that on paper Labour is winning, but psychologically, at least to me, it doesn't yet feel that it quite believes that. And just watching the response to the budget this week, I know it's very tempting to just pick off bits and say that that the government has failed. I just need to know a bit more from Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, I think is a very impressive Shadow Chancellor, is, all right then, give us the direction of travel. We need to give us, he does this, tell us where we're going. And hopefully it's not an HS2 job, but yes.
Give us a direction of travel then, Lucy.
All right, well, I thought the question was about the Conservative, but yeah, look, I think...
Is it possible for the Conservatives to turn around current polling? I imagine you will say no.
No, I wouldn't say no, not at all. Look, I think the first thing to say is the Labour Party, we suffered our worst election defeat in our history in 2019. We returned fewer MPs than we'd ever returned before at a general election. That was a very, very low ebb for the Labour Party. And, of course, the Conservatives returned a pretty thumping majority, an 80-seat majority at that election. And I think most people then, and for probably a year or two after then, thought that the prospect of the Labour Party winning the next election was a pretty long way off prospect. But here we are today, with that now being a possibility. It's a possibility that we shoulder with heavy responsibility, that we've even got to this position. But absolutely, by no means do we take that for granted. Politics moves very, very quickly these days, and it was only sort of 18 months or so ago that it was on the front page of all the newspapers about how everyone was looking forward, or Boris was looking forward to his second and third term as Prime Minister. And 18 months on, we're in a very different political situation.
And what about Anne's point about the direction of travel?
So I think we've done what we needed to do to kind of get our party to this position now in quite a short space of time. And, as John and others have said, Labour is now producing the plans that others are copying. In fact, so much so, the Conservatives are now copying a lot of our plans in their budget and so on this week. But we know that the next stage of that is we've really got to convince you, not only that you can trust us with your vote, that we won't crash the economy like the Tories have done in recent months, but we'll be sound money and we'll look after the economy. But more importantly, we will transform this country for the better. We have got a great future as a country. We can steal those big jobs of the future, those new green jobs, the digital jobs. We're going through a massive transition in our economy, but in places like Warrington around the country. And that's the job we've got to do, to convince you that we've got those big, ambitious plans to change the country for the better, and that everyone can fairly share in that. And we can restore our public services to their former glory last time we were in office.
Let's hear a little bit from our audience. Yes, there's a hand up right at the back, man in the green jumper.
So I've watched the last 3 Conservative leaders finish their victory speeches with words along the effect of, right, it's time to get on with it. And then they close the book and then they walk back into number 10. 12 to 18 months to roll out something that happened in the budget, which you've identified as an issue, is too long. Also, as well, we've spoken about high-speed railway too. Billions and billions of pounds are being spent on the development stages alone. So when it comes to the stage where you've actually got to fund it, that's just going to increase costs as well. Now, the sunk cost fallacy believes that the more money you put into something, and when it doesn't actually come to fruition, you might as well just cancel plans. So why don't we spend the 60, 70 billion on high speed 2 in the infrastructure of the budget instead?
OK.
Ramp up things quicker.
OK. The woman here in the white T-shirt.
Hi. I just think that people forget sometimes that we've been through economic turmoil, and I think that Rishi Sunak, genuinely, he's got a strategy, and the Labour Party and other parties are underestimating how much it's actually taking to get out. I understand that Liz Truss, she highlighted the economic issue, but now inflation's going down to 2.9%. I do think there is being some positive change that's being underestimated.
OK. And the one back there in the green top and the glasses.
The last 3 years have shown us what Britain has been like, but the governments haven't seen that. The people of this country have done what we wanted for us to do. Why can't you do for us now and get this country back on track?
And you're speaking, sorry, to the Conservatives or to Labour?
To both governments.
Both. OK, all right. John?
Yeah. I mean, the election is inherently unpredictable because who knows how we'll all feel in 18 months' time or whatever. I think also, the Conservatives have the advantage now of having a decent person at the helm of the party, which is a good change for the better, and a decent person as Chancellor. So I think their team is a much stronger team than it was. That having been said, there is a vast amount, and I've had access to some of it because I've asked for it, frankly, and I'm sure anyone else could get the same, of policy development preparation that's been done by Labour. So I think they are ready to move very rapidly if they are elected on a lot of the issues we've talked about here. I hope the Conservatives will get themselves to a similar level of preparation by the time we get to the general election so that there is a fair choice. Now, I think what we need to do...
But it sounds like your choice would be Labour.
At the moment. At the moment. Now, what I think we need to do, though, is to actually get into grown-up politics in the UK, and this is where I take issue with Stephen. I think describing Keir Starmer as David Cameron in a red tie or whatever, frankly, trivialises politics. It doesn't. And frankly, if you were to say something similar about a leading Conservative politician, I'd feel the same way. I think we've got to grow up. We've got to learn to work together because actually a lot of these issues that need to be fixed are not going to be fixed in one parliament. They're going to take 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. And I would love to see the major parties coming together, hammering out what do we need to do, for example, to fix childcare, to get to some consent. What do we need to do to fix the NHS? I mean, at the moment, you know, we have massive problems. One of my other jobs, I chair the Council of Imperial College in London, which has got a huge medical school. We have agreed to start a medical school in Carlisle because there's a huge shortage of doctors and nurses in Cumbria. What we've been told by the Department of Health is if we educate 30 students a year in Cumbria, we're going to have to educate 30 fewer students in London, which is crazy. Ridiculous. We need more doctors, more nurses, and yet the Department of Health, you know, is actually holding the line on that and saying you can't increase the numbers. They don't mind if we take in more foreign students, that's fine, but we can't take in more British students. And that is absolutely insane, given where we are.
On John's last point, I agree with him. I think that is crazy.
So why didn't they lift it? Why is that happening then?
I don't know. And when I finish this, I'm sure I'll try and find out.
Because there's a cap.
But hold on, let me just
answer
answer the question. Look, so can we do it? It's possible, but it will be very hard. But
so it'll be very hard for the Conservatives to win the next general election.
Of course, it will be difficult. And because, frankly, the turmoil
do you think it's even possible?
Well, it's possible. Yes, of course it is. If we do the right things. We've heard tonight about issues, for example, about childcare, on people's frustration that, you know, we've got to deliver on it. And that's the sort of policy we're going to have to deliver on and get that right so that people can see at the next election they can trust us. On the economy, the lady at the front was talking about how we've been through a lot of economic turmoil. You know, Rishi Sunak is a decent, competent person who understands economic issues well. He's the right person at the helm for this country at the moment. And over the coming months, and over the next 12, 18 months, however long it is, yes, if he shows people that we can build a Britain fit for the 2030s and outlines a vision for our economy that is coherent, that people understand, that builds the great jobs and opportunities that we need in all parts of the country, then yes, that's a key part of it. You mentioned the NHS, John. It's absolutely critical that we get the NHS back to a position where people have more trust in it than they've had. I think that the COVID has had a huge impact on the NHS, the people who work in it, the backlogs are there. We have to get those down. Again, if we don't deliver on that, then no, we won't be re-elected. And the last thing I'd just say, and it hasn't really come up, but I do a lot of work on younger people and their opportunities looking in society and the economy. I think we've got to focus a lot more of our policy effort as a party on the opportunities for the next generation, so that they can see that there's a future for them too. And, you know, if we can do those things, then we have a chance of being re-elected.
We've only got about 30 seconds left, Stephen, but I know you want to come back in.
I don't think it's an unfair comparison, and we'll take one example.
It's absolutely ridiculous comparison.
So the government's policy just the other day was to stop the boats. Labour's policy the next day, stop small boats. Almost the exact same policy. When you look at the single market, it's the same. When you look at the customs union, it's the same. When you look at freedom of movement, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, their policies are the exact same.
No,
and we shouldn't be afraid to call it out for what it is.
No, they aren't. And you're just being ridiculous.
Should we call David Cameron and find out what he thinks?
I suspect David Cameron will disagree.
I think so too.
OK. Yeah, let's just keep things calm. Anyway, we have got to the end of the programme. I'm sorry, I know more of you got your hands up. I'm afraid we've run out of time to come round to you. Thank you very much to the panel, to all of you for coming along here this evening in Warrington. It was great to see you. And thank you to you at home for watching. Remember that next week we are in Newcastle under Lyme if you want to come and watch the programme. We're live on iPlayer at 8 o'clock every week, or, of course, always on BBC One after 10 o'clock news. From all of us here in Warrington, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.